Forget spreadsheets and Zoom calls. The most stressful part of your workday probably doesn't involve wrestling a dog out of church or tasting your client's urine for medical purposes. History's job market was less of a career path and more of a bizarre, desperate fever dream. We're about to explore the professions so absurd and stomach-churning that they make your worst day at the office look like a tropical vacation. These aren't just weird facts. They were someone's grim and often hilarious reality. 1. The groom of the stool. Alright, let's just get right into it. In Tudor England, the most powerful dude in the kingdom, the one with the king's ear, the ultimate influencer, was the guy who watched the king take a dump. No, I'm not kidding. The groom of the stool was the king's personal bathroom buddy. His entire job was to help the monarch with his, royal decrees. And because he was there for the king's most vulnerable moments, he became the ultimate confidant. Imagine dukes and earls begging this guy, "Hey, Bob, listen, after the king finishes his morning business, could you mention that I'd be great for that new tax collector job?" This guy was literally the gatekeeper to the throne, and his office was a toilet. 2. The orgy planner. You think your friend who plans a good tailgate is a hero? Meet the Roman arbiter elegantii, or as I like to call him, the VP of Getting Wild. This wasn't about just putting out some chips and dip. This guy's job was to orchestrate pure, unadulterated debauchery on an epic scale. He was a party planner whose checklist included source 100 gallons of the best wine, hire musicians who can play for 12 hours straight, and find 67 of the most flexible acrobats in the empire. Stat. If the party was lame, he didn't just get a bad review. He might literally get fed to the host's pet lion. Talk about a high-pressure gig. Your job is to make sure everyone has the most legendary, regrettable night of their lives. 3. The fuller. So, you're a Roman, you've got a nice toga, but you spilled some olive oil on it. What do? You take it to the fuller, the local dry cleaner. And what's their secret cleaning agent? What magical substance gets out those tough Roman stains? Human pee. Gallons of it. They would collect urine from public toilets, let it ferment to get that extra strong ammonia kick, and then just stomp on your clothes in it all day. So when a Roman senator walked by, looking all fresh and clean in his dazzling white toga, he smelled faintly of a stadium bathroom after a big game. And this was considered high-end laundry service. 4. The leech collector. Picture the worst internship you can possibly imagine. Now, make it 10 times worse and add blood-sucking worms. You now have the job of a leech collector. These poor souls were the medical suppliers of the pre-modern world. Their brilliant business model was to wade into a disgusting, disease-ridden swamp, use their own naked legs as bait, and just wait. After a few hours of becoming a living leech buffet, they'd pull the little vampires off, sell them to a doctor for pocket change, and probably go get a tetanus shot. Or more likely, just bleed for a while and hope for the best. 5. The knocker-upper. Before your iPhone alarm gently wakes you from your slumber, people had a much more aggressive system. They had a knocker-upper. This was a dude with a massive stick whose entire job was to walk around at 5 a.m. and beat on your window until you woke up. There was no snooze button. The snooze button was this guy screaming, "Oi, get up, you lazy git, or I'm putting this stick through your window." It was literally a professional pest, a guy you paid to annoy you every single morning. And if he was having a bad day, he might just use a pea shooter and pepper your window like it was a drive-by breakfast call. 6. The vomit collector. The Romans did not mess around when it came to feasting. They had a problem. Their stomachs would get full, but there was still more roasted peacock to eat. The solution? The vomit collector. This was a slave whose entire existence was dedicated to being a mobile, human barf bag. When a guest was feeling a bit full, they'd give a little nod, and this guy would rush over with a bowl and then clean up the evidence so the feasting could continue. This was the peak of luxury. Being so rich you could afford to outsource your body's most basic rejection signal. "Jeeves, I've had too much lark's tongue. Fetch the bucket." 7. The pineapple renter. In the 1700s, pineapples were like the Bugattis of the fruit world. They were so expensive and exotic that only the mega-rich could afford one. So what did the slightly less rich do? They rented one. For real. You could pay a fee to rent a single pineapple for your party. You couldn't eat it, you just had it. You'd carry it around like a scepter or put it on a table to show everyone you were a big shot. It was the original doing it for the gram, a flex so ridiculous, it's genuinely impressive. Imagine the stress of being the guy holding the rental pineapple all night, terrified of dropping the world's most expensive fruit. 8. The toad doctor. Got a nasty cough? Feeling a bit under the weather? Forget antibiotics. What you clearly need is a toad doctor. This guy's medical diagnosis was always the same. You need more toad in your life. His primary prescription was to take a live, probably very unhappy, toad, stick it in a pouch and have you wear it around your neck. The theory was that the toad would act like a little slimy sponge, sucking the sickness and evil spirits right out of you. It was the ultimate, trust me bro, medical practice. The only thing you were guaranteed to get was salmonella and a very confused amphibian dangling from your chest. 9. The gong farmer. Okay, the name sounds kinda cool, right? Like a mystical dude who grows giant bronze gongs in a serene field. Wrong. So wrong. Gong was old-timey slang for a toilet pit. This guy was a human septic tank pump. In the dead of night, he would climb into a literal pit of human filth and shovel it out bucket by bucket. Imagine telling your friends what you do for a living. Oh, I'm a farmer. I cultivate the collective bowel movements of an entire village. And the craziest part? The pay was fantastic. Because shocker, nobody else wanted the job. This guy was the smelliest and quite possibly the richest guy in the neighborhood. 10. The nomenclator. Imagine you're a politician in ancient Rome, and you're terrible with names. You can't just whip out your phone and check Facebook. So what do? You buy a slave to be your walking, talking LinkedIn profile. That was the nomenclator. This guy's entire job was to follow you around and whisper in your ear, okay, that's Senator Maximus. His wife hates your wife, he's got a gambling problem, and he loves talking about his prize-winning cabbages. Go get him, tiger. This dude was the ultimate social wingman, the secret weapon behind every powerful Roman who was too important to remember anyone's name. 11. The court jester. People think of jesters as simple idiots juggling in the corner. No. The court jester was the original Don Rickles, a professional roast comic whose only audience was the most powerful, easily offended person in the country. The king. He was the only person who could look the king in the eye and say, "Your Majesty, that new policy is dumber than a bag of hammers," and get a laugh instead of a beheading. It was the most high-stakes comedy gig of all time. If a joke bombed, it didn't just mean awkward silence. It meant you might be the new centerpiece at a royal execution. 12. The sluggard waker. You think your Sunday mornings are rough? Try going to church in the 1700s. The sermons were like 4 hours long, and the pews were basically wooden torture devices. So, naturally, people fell asleep. The church's solution? They hired a guy with a big stick. The sluggard waker was the official, "Hey, wake up," officer of the church. He had a long pole, and here's the best part. One end had a brass knob for smacking the men on the head, and the other had a fluffy foxtail for tickling the women awake. It was the most inefficient and weirdly specific alarm clock ever invented. 13. The post-mortem photographer. The Victorians were weird, man. When photography was new and expensive and people dropped dead all the time, they came up with a heartwarming yet unbelievably creepy tradition. They'd take family portraits with their recently deceased relatives. I'm not making this up. They'd hire a photographer to come over, prop up dead Uncle Edgar in a chair with a special stand, and have the whole family pose around him. Okay, everyone, look happy. Little Timmy, put your arm around Grandpa's corpse. That's it. Perfect. It was their only chance to get a photo, but it resulted in the most haunted family albums in human history. 14. The Pure Finder. In the hierarchy of disgusting Victorian jobs, this one is a strong contender for the crown. The pure finder had one of the most oddly poetic job titles for one of the grossest tasks imaginable. He was a professional dog poop collector. He would wander the filthy streets of London, scanning the ground for pure, the fancy term for canine droppings. Why? He'd sell it to tanneries, who used the ammonia in the poop to soften leather. This guy was a connoisseur of crap, a specialist in fecal procurement. He saw treasure where everyone else just saw a reason to watch their step. 15. The crossing sweeper. Picture this. The streets are basically a river of mud, horse manure, and garbage. You're a rich person in fancy shoes. You need to get to the other side. This is a crisis. Enter the crossing sweeper. This was usually a kid or an old person who would post up on a street corner with a broom and, for a coin, would frantically sweep a path through the filth for you to walk across. It was like a human red carpet, but the carpet was a temporarily clean patch of muck. You'd pay a poor person to clear the poop out of your way just long enough for you to pass. Capitalism. 16. The toad eater. This job sounds like a frat house dare that went horribly wrong. It was the sidekick gig for a traveling quack doctor. Here's the scam. The assistant, the toad eater, would stand in front of a crowd and eat what was claimed to be a poisonous toad. He'd then put on a huge performance, gagging, convulsing, and acting like he was about to die. Then, the doctor would swoop in, feed him a bottle of his miracle cure, which was probably just whiskey, and the assistant would make a miraculous recovery. The crowd would go wild and buy the fake medicine. This guy's entire job was to be the before picture for a scam, and it involved putting a toad in his mouth. What a life. 17. The armpit plucker. The Romans were obsessed with being smooth, hairless, and smelling, less like a Roman. So, in the public baths, you had a specialist called the Allipolis. His entire career, his life's calling, was to rip the hair out of other dudes' armpits with a pair of bronze tweezers. Imagine the scene. You're trying to relax, and next to you is a guy screaming like he's being tortured because the armpit plucker is giving him the business. The philosopher Seneca literally complained about it, saying the shrieks of the newly plucked were ruining the bathhouse vibe. This guy was a professional depilator, an ancient esthetician whose only tool was pain. 18. The watercaster. Oh, you think your doctor's weird? Meet the medieval watercaster, which is a fancy name for the pee wizard. This guy was a physician, whose entire diagnostic toolkit was a flask of your urine. He wouldn't just look at it. He'd hold it up to the light, give it a swirl, sniff it like a fine wine, and yes, sometimes he would taste it. Interesting. I'm getting notes of kidney failure with a finish of, you probably shouldn't have eaten that entire goat. It's a bit nutty. This guy would diagnose you with the plague based on how your pee tasted. And people paid for this. 19. The wig powderer. In the 18th century, if you weren't wearing a wig the size of a small poodle, you were basically a peasant. But these wigs had to be snow white. So you hired a wig powderer. His job was to blast your wig with powdered starch or flour. This often happened in a special powder closet where you'd sit with a paper cone over your face, and this dude would just unleash a powder storm on your head with a giant bellows. You'd walk out looking like you just survived an explosion in a bakery. It was the height of fashion to look like a ghost who just sneezed. 20. The phrenologist. This dude was a professional head feeler, a certified bump fondler. In the 19th century, phrenology was a science that said your entire personality could be read from the shape of your skull. So you'd go to a phrenologist, and he'd sit you down and start groping your head like he was trying to pick a ripe melon. Ah, yes, a prominent bump here on your destructiveness organ. You should probably avoid sharp objects, but this indentation on your love of children lobe means you'll be a great parent. That'll be $10. It was palm reading for your skull, and people ate it up. 21. The dog whipper. Churches used to be chaotic places, and stray dogs would wander in all the time, barking, sniffing, and generally being dogs. The solution: hire a guy whose entire job title was dog whipper. That's it. That's the job. While the priest is talking about peace and love, This dude is lurking in the aisles with a whip, acting as the official bouncer for the canine community. A dog sneaks in to hear the good word? Whack! Get out of here, Fido. This is the house of God, not the dog park. It was a real salaried position. 22. The necessary woman. In a giant fancy mansion, you had a servant with the most elegant and misleading job title ever, the necessary woman. It sounds like she's the indispensable head of staff, right? The person who keeps everything running? Nope. Her job was to deal with poop. She was in charge of the necessary stool, which was the chamber pot. Her entire day, every day, was spent collecting, emptying, and cleaning the poop pots of every single person in the house. She was necessary because without her, the entire castle would literally be knee-deep in filth. 23. The professional mourner. In ancient times, if you wanted to prove how important your dead relative was, you needed a big, loud funeral. But what if nobody was that sad? No problem. You just hired professional mourners. These were basically emotional actors, grief for hire. You'd pay a group of women to show up and just absolutely lose their minds. They would weep, shriek, tear their own clothes, and throw dirt on their heads. The more you paid, the crazier they'd get. It was all about showing off your wealth. My father was so beloved, I had to hire 20 women to fake cry about his death. 24. The lector. Okay, this is the weirdest office perk in history. In giant cigar factories, the work was mind-numbingly boring, so the workers would pool their money and hire a lector. This guy would sit on a platform above everyone and just read to them all day long. Not boring safety manuals. He's reading exciting novels, fiery newspaper articles, political pamphlets. Imagine trying to roll a delicate cigar leaf while some dude is shouting the dramatic conclusion to a pirate adventure story. It's like a live 8-hour podcast was a standard employee benefit in 1902. 25. The bone setter. Before we had orthopedic surgeons with fancy x-rays and sterile operating rooms, you had the bone setter. This was usually a big burly guy in a village whose medical training consisted of, "My grandpappy showed me how to do it." If you broke your arm, you'd go to him, and his solution was brute force. He would yank, twist, and shove your limb with a terrifying amount of confidence until he heard a satisfying or horrifying crunch. There was no anesthesia, just his grim assurance that it's supposed to hurt. You either walked out with your bone miraculously set or with a new, even more creative fracture. It was a 50-50 shot between a cure and a permanent limp. 26. The iridologist. This is a special kind of quackery that requires intense eye contact. The iridologist was a diagnostician who claimed he could see every disease you have or ever will have by staring into your eyes. Not in a romantic way, but in a deeply unsettling, analytical way. He had a huge, complicated chart that looked like a pizza, where every slice of your iris corresponded to a different organ. "Ah, I see a small yellow fleck in your pancreas zone," he'd declare. "That means you have a weak spirit and should avoid yellow foods." It was a medical practice based entirely on making stuff up while looking at the pretty colors in your eye. It had zero scientific basis, but he'd say it with enough conviction to make you question your last banana. 27. The medical astrologer. For a very long time, being a doctor also meant being an astronomer. You'd go to a medical astrologer with a nasty fever, and the first thing he'd do isn't check your temperature. It's ask for your exact time and date of birth. He'd then disappear for an hour to draw up your astrological chart. He'd come back looking very serious and say, "Well, the problem is that Mars is in retrograde and it's messing with your liver's vibe. I can give you this potion, but you absolutely cannot drink it until Jupiter aligns with Venus, or your spleen might explode." This wasn't a fringe idea. It was mainstream medicine. Your entire treatment plan was dictated by cosmic gossip. 28. The alchemist. The alchemist was the ultimate get-rich-quick schemer of the Middle Ages, but with a weirdly scientific approach. His main goal was to turn lead into gold, which is a pretty solid business plan. But he was also trying to whip up an elixir of life for immortality. He'd spend all day in a lab that was part chemistry set, apart a cult bookstore, boiling strange liquids, mixing powders, and chanting at his beakers. While he epically failed at making gold, in the process he accidentally discovered things like phosphorus and invented distillation. He was the world's most ambitious failure, a guy who tried to become a god and ended up just inventing the basics of modern chemistry by mistake. 29. The Radium Girls. This job starts out as a dream and ends as a body horror nightmare. In the 1920s, glowing watches were the coolest new thing, and the glow came from radium paint. Companies hired hundreds of young women for the delicate job of painting the tiny numbers on the watch dials. To get a fine point on the brush, their bosses told them to lick the tip. "It's harmless," they said. They would sit there all day, licking brushes loaded with a substance so radioactive it was literally destroying their bodies from the inside out. Their bones started to crumble. Their jaws would get necrosis. They themselves would glow in the dark. It was a dream job that turned them into human time bombs. 30. The Spit Boy. Imagine your job is to be a human rotisserie motor. That was the Spit Boy. In a giant, sweltering kitchen, a massive slab of meat would be roasting over an open fire. And this poor kid's job was to sit there for hours and hours, slowly turning the crank to make sure it cooked evenly. The heat was unbearable, the smoke was blinding, and the work was so boring it could drive a person insane. If he slowed down or dozed off, the cook would give him a smack. It was one of the lowest, most miserable jobs in the kitchen. In some places, they even replaced the boy with a special dog and a hamster wheel, which tells you exactly how much they valued the position. 31. The Lamplighter. Before the world was illuminated by the flip of a switch, cities were plunged into total darkness every night. The hero who fought back the shadows was the Lamplighter. This guy had a route, like a mailman, for light. Every single evening, he'd walk for miles with a long pole, lighting hundreds of individual gas lamps one by one. And then, at the crack of dawn, he'd do the whole route in reverse to put them all out. He was a familiar, rhythmic presence, the guy who single-handedly turned on the city. It was a steady job, but your daily commute was literally the entire town, twice. 32. The Mudlark. The River Thames in London was basically a flowing toilet and garbage dump. But for the city's poorest kids, it was a workplace. They were called mudlarks. At low tide, they would wade into the thick, disgusting, disease-filled mud on the riverbanks and search for anything they could sell. They were looking for dropped coins, bits of coal, old nails, scrap rope, anything. They would spend their entire day sinking up to their knees in centuries of filth, hoping to find enough junk to afford a piece of bread. It was a level of poverty and desperation that's hard to even comprehend, sifting through poison for pennies. 33. The Master of the Royal Buckhounds. This is a job title that sounds like it was invented by a 6-year-old playing make-believe. The Master of the Royal Buckhounds was a real, high-ranking, and incredibly well-paid position in the British court. What did he do? He was in charge of the king's hunting dogs. That's it. He was the most ridiculously overqualified dog walker in human history. But because hunting was the king's favorite hobby, this guy got to hang out with the monarch all the time. He got a fancy house, a huge salary, and political influence, all because he was good at managing a pack of slobbering hounds. It's the ultimate proof that it's not what you know. It's who you go hunting with. 34. The Bellman. In a world without smartphones, TV news, or even reliable clocks, the bellman was your source for everything. He was a combination of a clock, a newspaper, and a security guard. In the middle of the night, he'd walk the dark, spooky streets, ringing a giant bell to prove he wasn't a ghost, and then he'd shout out the time and any important news. 10 o'clock and all's well, except for Margaret, who was just accused of being a witch. Also, there's a sale on turnips tomorrow. He was the original push notification, a walking, talking town feed who delivered his updates in a rhyming couplet if he was feeling fancy. 35. The Goose Herder. You have 1,000 geese. The market is 100 miles away. You don't have a truck. What do? You hire a goose herder, a specialist in long-distance poultry transportation. His secret weapon was tar. He would create a shallow pit of warm, sticky tar and another one of sand. Then, he'd march the entire flock of geese through the tar and then the sand. This created a durable, disposable little boot on each goose's foot, protecting them on their long walk. Imagine the job interview. So, what are your qualifications? Well, I'm an expert at putting shoes on angry birds using hot road gunk. 36. The powder monkey. On a massive sailing warship, the cannons were hungry and their food was gunpowder. The waiters who served them were powder monkeys. These were little kids, chosen because they were small and fast. During the absolute chaos of a naval battle, with cannonballs flying, splinters everywhere, and men screaming, these boys would sprint from the gunpowder storage deep inside the ship up to the cannon crews on the deck. They were basically human ammunition belts, running through a storm of death and destruction with a bag of explosives. It was arguably the most terrifying job on the ship, and it was given to children. 37. The keeper of the royal elephants. What's the one thing every great European king needs to prove he's the man? An elephant. It was the ultimate status symbol, a living, breathing monster truck of the animal kingdom. But an elephant is not a goldfish. It needs care. So you hire a keeper of the royal elephants. This guy's job was to figure out how to feed, house, and not get trampled by an animal that was designed for a completely different continent. He was part zookeeper, part royal advisor on all things elephantine. He probably spent most of his days explaining to the king that, no, you can't ride the elephant into battle, and yes, it really does produce that much poop every day. 38. The mole catcher for the king. You're the king. You have magnificent, perfectly manicured royal lawns. Then, one morning, you see it. A molehill. It's an act of treason against your perfect turf. Who do you call? The official mole catcher for the king. This wasn't just a gardener. This was a salaried professional whose entire existence was dedicated to waging a one-man war against small, furry mammals. He was a subterranean assassin, a master of traps and tactics for ensuring the royal gardens remained as smooth as a billiard table. It's a job of such absurdly specific importance that it's just perfect. 39. The royal chocolate maker. When chocolate first hit Europe, it wasn't a candy bar. It was an exotic, bitter, and incredibly expensive drink for the super elite. Naturally, every royal court needed a royal chocolate maker. This wasn't just some cook. This was a high-level specialist, a chocolatier before the word was cool. His only duty was to prepare the sacred hot chocolate for the royal family. The recipes were state secrets. He was like a liquid alchemist, grinding cacao beans and mixing them with exotic spices to create the beverage of the gods. He had one job, and it was to make the king's magic brown drink. 40. Gilding the pills. Medicine in the old days was often foul, bitter, and tasted like it was brewed in a swamp. If you were rich, you didn't have to suffer like the common folk. You could have your apothecary gild the pills. An assistant would painstakingly take each individual pill and cover it in a whisper-thin layer of real gold leaf. Did this do anything medically? Absolutely not. It was pure, unadulterated flexing. It was a way of saying, I am so wealthy and important, even my medicine has to be blinged out. I refuse to let my tongue touch something that isn't coated in precious metal. 41. The knitting spy. The Industrial Revolution was a cutthroat business. The patterns for making things like fancy lace were top secret, like the nuclear codes of the textile world. So, companies would hire knitting spies. This was usually a woman who would pretend to be a new resident in a village known for its knitting. She would make friends, join the knitting circles, and all the while be secretly memorizing the complex finger movements and patterns. Some even believed that secret messages and schematics were being encoded into the fabric itself. It was corporate espionage at its coziest, a silent war fought with needles and yarn. 42. The calculator, horse racing. Forget your pocket calculator. At the horse track, the original calculator was a guy with a supercomputer for a brain. They were called calculators or lightning adders. As thousands of bets were being placed on different horses, these guys would stand there, mentally processing the flood of information and instantly recalculate the shifting odds in real time. They had to be faster and more accurate than anyone else, shouting out the new numbers to the bookies. It was an insane display of mental gymnastics, a high-pressure job where a single misplaced decimal could cost a fortune. 43. The tasher. While the rich were living it up above ground, a special breed of entrepreneur was working down below. The tasher was a sewer scavenger in Victorian London. Armed with a long pole and a lantern, they would wade through the literal river of human waste and filth that flowed beneath the city. They were looking for anything valuable that had been dropped or washed away: coins, jewelry, scrap metal. It was a treasure hunt in hell. You were constantly at risk of being drowned in sewage, poisoned by toxic gas, or eaten by rats the size of house cats. But for a few shiny coins, it was a risk they were willing to take. 44. The master of the king's revels. In Tudor and Stuart England, the court loved to party, but they didn't want just any old party. They wanted pageants, plays, and masks. So they had an official government position called the Master of the Revels. This guy was basically the Minister of Fun. His job was to organize and approve all the entertainment for the royal court. But here's the kicker. He was also the official state censor. So one day he'd be commissioning a new play from some up-and-coming writer named William Shakespeare, and the next day he'd be redacting lines from that same play because they were too politically spicy. He was a weird combination of a Broadway producer and a government censor, a guy who had to make sure the party was both awesome and didn't accidentally inspire a peasant uprising. So there it is. History's resume was a minefield of filth, danger, and pure absurdity. It seems for every terrible problem, an even more terrible job was born. Now, for a real challenge in the comments. The one-year sentence. You are forced to pick one of these jobs to do for a full year to survive. Which one do you choose? And which one represents your absolute soul-crushing nightmare? No easy answers. While you ponder that delightful scenario, obliterate the like button and subscribe for more unbelievable history.